And back now to our top story, a wave of fatal shootings across the country over the weekend. As bipartisan talks on Capitol Hill over new gun laws are reaching a critical stage, we could see a framework in the Senate as early as this week. Let's bring in now Niall Stanage with the White House. He is the White House columnist with The Hill. Good morning, Niall. A poll just last week found that 54% of Americans back stricter laws regulating the sale of guns. But when it's broken down by party, it's 79% of Democrats versus 27% of Republicans, half of independents. So against that backdrop and given the record so far, what do you expect could actually get passed in the Senate?
If anything gets passed, Ruta Bay, I think it's going to be something pretty modest. From what we're hearing from Capitol Hill right now, the likelihood is some expansion of background checks and perhaps incentives for states to introduce so-called red flag laws. We're not even talking about universal background checks, not talking about a federal red flag law, certainly not talking about the more controversial elements or segments of gun control, such as, for example, an assault weapons ban. That's not on the agenda at all.
And what is the risk factor for Republicans on this?
The risk factor is essentially that there's a certain proportion of the Republican base that is just very resistant to any move toward gun control at all. And we see that risk in very vivid terms just in the past few days in the matter of Chris Jacobs, a Republican congressman from upstate New York, near Buffalo. He recently said that he was open to an assault weapons ban. Within a week, he had announced that he would not seek re-election because the blowback was so considerable from Conservatives in his district. So that's, as I say, a very clear example of the political risks that you're talking about.
And not to mention the loss of funding from the gun lobby for some of those politicians. Democratic Senator Chris Murphy saying yesterday that lawmakers should go it alone without President Biden on bipartisan talks. He said, quote, "I think the Senate needs to do this ourselves. I've talked to the White House every single day since these negotiations began, but right now the Senate needs to handle these negotiations." Is it surprising that the Democrat leading these talks doesn't seem to want the president involved at this point?
I get why the question would be asked as to whether that's surprising. I tend to think not, because President Biden just doesn't have a lot of political muscle to exert right now. In the polling averages, his job approval is down around 40%. Nick was just talking about the possibility that he might not run for re-election. And then there's just the question of, would the president's involvement make a deal more or less likely? We're obviously in a midterm election year. I think there's the possibility that Republicans would be politically reluctant to be seen to be giving President Biden a political win. So I think that's why you have Senator Murphy trying to keep the focus and the negotiation in the Senate rather than involving the White House overly much.
Let's talk about Republican Congressman Steve Scalise. He himself was shot. He was nearly killed in 2017. He calls red flag laws unconstitutional. He says Democrats are ignoring some of the root causes of rising gun violence, including, quote, liberal DAs. He said, quote, "They're letting criminals back out on the streets, and inevitably what you see is higher rates of crime. And what you're also seeing is more and more American citizens, law-abiding citizens, buying guns to defend themselves." So is there a risk that there's a Band-Aid on crime problem that only seems to be growing? Or is the accessibility and availability of guns used in these mass shootings a bigger contributor than other factors like liberal DAs, for example?
When you look at the data, it seems to favour the second of those explanations. Now, that is not to deny that there has been a problem with rising violent crime in the past couple of years. There clearly has. People aren't sure whether that is some side effect of the COVID lockdowns or whether it's a consequence of maybe police being demoralised after so many protests. The problem with the congressman's argument is that if the problem was liberal DAs, then you would expect the murder rate to be worse in states with a generally liberal approach, more so than in conservative states. That isn't what we see. Actually, if you look at the CDC's figures, in the last few years, 3 of the states that have been highest in terms of gun killings have been Louisiana, Mississippi and Alabama, none of which obviously are states that are exactly synonymous with a liberal approach to law and order.
All right, well, the conversation continues. Niall, thank you. Good to see you this morning.
You too, good to be.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.